almost the same, and one is IIMAT and one is AMAT, which of course means he or she loves in Latin, but hey, but one was the body and one was the land. And in that sense, she was saying they're the same, not the land is the body is the land. And when you've got that, then love poem becomes something that is talking about making love to all the imperfect world. Oh, not just a person, not just a sliver of it, but the whole thing. So I liked it a lot. I think that she took the picture. Oh, and it's a funny kind of picture. The It's almost in motion. And what that motion means is hard to say too. It's the same hand in the front as it is on the back cover. And the hair is not the same on the front and on the back. And it almost looks like you can see her bone on the back. But at the same time, there's something that maybe is a tattoo in motion. Oh, the necklace that she's wearing on the front looks like it was beaded. I don't know. Oh, she definitely has kind of a tattooed armband on the left.
Mm-hmm.
But I, because it's in motion, it's not like she's trying to hide her face. It's more like the hand is coming up and over, or coming over and down. But I don't know. The picture interested me, but I didn't have any good interpretation.
Yeah.
That's my sense worth.
Roseanne, what do you think? I think you're on mute.
Hello, everyone. I think it was interesting those comments just made that she might be trying to hide something, but to me, it is that this book is all about revealing oneself. For me, it was establishing her identity and everything that defined her. So I look at that cover art and I feel as though she's starting to expose herself, and yet there is a bit of a veil yet on the first page. On the back, her face is hidden. But I do agree that right at the wrist, it looks like bone to me. They are being exposed on that back cover. So I think she's really opening herself up, and I felt that through the book.
Yeah, anybody else? Sorry, Sharon, and then I'll do you, KB.
Is she pushing her hair back with her hand? If you look at the picture on the back, that's almost what it looks like she's doing to be able to see more clearly what's out there.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, KB.
Sorry about that. I was looking at her eyes, and her eyes look sad to me in this. And then as a teacher, knowing that she's teaching, it was a little disconcerting that I can see part of her breast on the back cover too. I was just like, I guess I wouldn't want how revealing do I want to be to everyone, including my students? So I don't know. It was just a little, I was looking at the front trying to figure it out. And then when I got to the back, I was like, oh, wow, bone and, everything you can see. So I like the idea that somebody said it was revealing. I thought, yes, it is. It is.
Yeah, maybe from her Native American heritage, I think like the beaded necklace and the tattoo kind of is in alignment with that. Linda Parsons.
Yeah, of course, part of the title is Postcolonial, but she talks about colonizing throughout the book and what's been done to her people and their land. And to me, she does have an erasure poem in the book, and she talks a lot about ghosts. And it's almost like, even though I think it's a very ironic picture, because whereas it's a very strong identity that she's empowering in every poem, she's also talking about her culture being erased, or attempts to erase her people. So there's that too, because it's not real clear, it's kind of like, as someone said, like she is behind a veil a little bit. Anyway, it's a lot of interpretations.
Yeah. Leslie.
Well, on the heels of what Linda said, I think it's also important to consider the dedication on page 105. I think it's interesting, the dedication, this piece reads like a poem, although it comes after the notes and acknowledgments that these are all in the back of the book rather than the front. But she does say, toward the missing and murdered Indigenous, Native women, girls, trans women, non-binary, two-spirit people in our families, communities, and across the Americas and other occupied lands, right? And so I think even in her dedication, she's remembering the losses in the community.
Yeah, Jeff. You're muted though. Jeff, you're muted.
All right, I'm trying to unmute myself.
Okay.
Now, one thing I was thinking is, I'm reading that cover image through the lens of some of the language in the book, and especially toward the very end of that first poem, Postcolonial love poem. She says, "Great hands," is what she called mine. The rain will eventually come or not. Until then, we touch our bodies like wounds. The war never ended, and somehow begins again. And then at the very end of the book, toward all we have been born for and carry and have yet to become of love. And so I think I kind of read this image here through the lens of that beginning and that ending, but the body as a wound, and of course in the ways that Alice and others have talked about with the land as being the body also, but the wounds of the land, the wounds of the body, and then her physical body there, but then also this kind of front and back, the past and the future, and where we're headed, and looking at the world, but it's in motion, and it's maybe part of it's revealed, part of who a self is part here, but then like they get the fingertips you're kind of looking through. It's just a fascinating metaphor, I guess.
Yeah. Does anybody have any thoughts about the ordering of these poems, or the sections of these poems, and the way this book is laid out? Is anything striking to you? I guess I'll tell you why I'm asking, is because I noticed, I am familiar with her first book, My Brother Was an Aztec, and that book was a lot about her brother's addiction and his destructive nature and the harm that occurred to her family through her brother's actions. And so this book has some brother poems in it that I think are very intentionally placed in this book. Bloodlight, which is the first poem in the first section, but not the first poem in the book, because Postcolonial Love Poem is the first poem in the book, is a brother poem, and it's about, it has knives in it and also light in it as an image. And the second to the last poem of the book, the last poem in the main section, but not the last poem in the book, because that's grief work, is My Brother, My Wound, which also is a link to that first manuscript, right? And also has the knife image and light image. So I think, and then there's other brother poems that are kind of sprinkled with, you know, in the middle of this this book that I think are very intentionally laid out to draw this connection between this first book, her first book, and this book, which I thought was quite well done. Also, I really liked the separation of post-colonial love poem and grief work outside the main sections of the book, because while post-colonial love poem is the title poem, a love poem, but grief work is also a kind of a love poem in a kind of a backwards way, you know, but it's beautiful. And I think she did a really good job of laying this book out with intentionality to make some kind of landscape of the way that we're reading these poems. So I really like that. Anybody else have any thoughts before we move on? Also, if I don't see your hand raised or something, feel free to just start talking. Okay. Oh yeah, Catherine. You have to unmute though, you're muted.
I haven't actually found a pattern yet of where the bulls and the minotaurs and the horns appear, but it certainly seems to be a predominant motif.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and actually, there was something else. Like, I Minotaur and then Asterian's Lament, both are Minotaur, and they're the first poem in each of their sections, which I don't know if that has any meaning or not, but it's interesting.
Well, the Asterian, I wasn't sure, that's, I think, one of the Minotaur's names, but it's also a river god. And it's
right.
The poem with it's the river god who the rivers, I forget who does it, but someone assigns the rivers to Hera instead of Poseidon, and Poseidon gets righteously indignant and dams them so that they only flow during the wet season. So it's the Colorado, right?
Ah, yeah. Yeah, interesting. All right, so thinking about, okay, let's see. Leslie, you had something.
Oh, I was just gonna, on the heels of that,
Yeah.
about Colorado, I was just also going to comment that I was so impressed with the mythography she does here, the work kind of in writing herself into these stories and imbuing them with, in some instances, I think with a sense of the sacred. Not every single poem is like that. Some are just flat out funny, but or ironic. But I think there's a lot of that. She invites us to contemplate that.
Yeah. All right. Let's move on. Let's think about the poems themselves. Did you find a recurring theme? We've talked about this a little bit, actually, in the book, or any particular words or phrases that kept showing up, like Minotaur and Labyrinth? Kathleen, what do you think?
I was really struck often by the minerals and gemstones and the earthiness of everything, but and especially when she's writing the love poems to her lover, you know, the specific gemstones she mentions really enriched the visual for me of this collection. But you'll find them, you know, ultramarine threads or all different. I should have underlined more of them, but that was made things really vivid for me.
Yeah, I agree. KB.
thighs and hips, river and water. She is just got some of the most beautiful language I've seen in a long time, and I'm really glad you assigned this. But yeah, her language is just fantastic, and I'm glad she includes her native tongue in several of the poems.
Yeah. Annette. You're muted.
Sorry. I'm not sure it's the most predominant image in the book because there's so much about water and the body and land and so forth. But I was struck by how often light and lamps and lamp lighting and so forth came up in the book. I thought that was interesting. I wouldn't have anticipated the lamp lighting, maybe light as part of the natural landscape and so forth, but I thought that was interesting.
Yeah. Imelda?
I'm afraid I didn't use my pencil enough either, but I kept noticing little hints at church imagery and sacraments. Sacramental imagery really now and again. Yeah.
Tanya, what do you have? Don't forget to unmute.
I just loved, the concepts of erasure and what was missing and what was buried beneath the land. She has that beautiful, so haunting, because when I slip, she talks about her hand. I am only a hand, and when I slip it beneath the shirt of my lover, I disappear completely. Just really like sometimes large concepts of who's underneath the ground. My people are under the ground, but then my hand disappears too. It's just, there's a big scale and then up close.
Yeah.
There's a lot.
Yeah, Linda?
She also mentions America a lot, what it is and what it isn't, and how she and her people fit into it and don't. And kind of the parallel living or surviving and killing that's been going on between us for all of our years that we've been here. That struck me as just very common. She talks a lot about America.
Right. And that goes back to colonization, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
The Native American people and land, and also language, right? Part of her language has been taken over, especially like Manhattan is a Lenape word in that poem. Yeah, so I think that's spot on there. What else?
I was just going to throw in, piggybacking on Linda there for a second, but what you said reminded me of that poem on page 17 called American Arithmetic, which was one of the, Sandy asking us to pick a favorite poem was more like you got to narrow down to 10 and then you got to, Snake Light but this particular poem I thought was a very fascinating poem, and I liked that it came early in the book. I thought that was interesting. It one of the things I love to do is to think about the first poems in books and the last poems, and I often wonder would this be a different book if this poem were the first one, and that was one of the first ones I read that I wondered, well, that would have been a good one to start with. Which is not to say that I disagree with the one that she does begin with, but that would have set in motion a different kind of arc, I suppose. But I think that poem's really, really fascinating. Oh, mine efficient country.
I think when I was looking at recurring words, okay, hip was in there a lot in many, many different poems, which I really can't explain other than, you know, it's physical, you know, and fits in with some of the love poems. Of course, love is in there a lot. Basketball. She was a really fantastic basketball player. And then that was part of her culture too, right? That the tribe or the boys on the reservation played basketball. So that came up a lot. Then Labyrinth and Minotaur were in there a couple of times. And then light was in there quite a bit too. I wanted to read something that I found. This is from an interview. I just thought this quote from her is just so beautiful. Talking about love. So this is an interview from a Latin media group, online presence called Remezcla. I hadn't heard of it before, but there was an interview with her about this book. And she says this about love. A dangerous way of thinking lately is that we love as resistance. I understand that, but I refuse to let my love be only that. I am not loving against America or even in spite of it. I am loving because I was made to love. Love was made for me. My Creator made us from clay so that we might love this life and this land. He unloosed a river so that we might take care of it and be taken care of. I think that is love, to be and move like a river, a thing thirsted for and yet capable of sating, a thing wild and yet able to lift the seed into its life. How can I not write about love when I am lost in it every day, lost in that I can't imagine how to do it, and also lost in it that I am overflowing with it? I just thought that was beautiful. Linda Dunn, do you have something?
There we go. Yeah, there. That was one of the things that struck me in the book. I loved the way she talked about the river being in her, as well as, you know, her being able to be in rivers of various sorts. I love the way she used it metaphorically and physically in what she wrote. It seemed to me that thirst was such a big element in the book.
Mm.
I just had the feeling that the sexual act for her, I can't think of the word right here, but that was part of her needing to feel something in herself. And that was something that stayed with me throughout the book, that she feels lacking in some part of her.
We might have lost her. Oh, well, maybe she'll come back.
Yeah, she'll probably pop back in, hopefully.
Okay. Does anybody else have anything to say about?
Well, I put into the chat, unsoothable thirst is one type of haunting. That's a line on page 50. from that particular poem, the first body is the water. I think that connects with what Linda was talking about, and she mentioned thirst. So, and that's, it's hard for me to choose.
Yeah.
Again, it's really hard for me to choose a favorite poem, but that one is among it's the one I named for myself. But I'm not trying to backtrack, but
You know, one of the things that interested me, Snake Light was one of my favorite poems, and I really thought that that was kind of like an Ars Poetica, because she's saying, I can read a text in anything. To read a body is to break that body a little. When my desert reads a life out loud, it takes the body down back to calic and clay, one symbol at a time. And then she goes on and talks about the devotional fervor work of revision. Let's say it's all text, the animal, the dune, the wind and the cottonwood and the body, everything book, a form bound together. This is also book, the skeleton of a rattlesnake, sheathed tightly in its unopened flesh. And she just does these wonderful things with it. Oh, there's a point where she's found that snake skin, and she says, I gave the skin to my love and said, now I am a story like the snake. I am my own future. And then a little further, she talks about how in her Mojave language, when you desire the rattlesnake, you call out its first name. Oh, you can't know the rattlesnake's power if you've never felt its first name stretch and strike in your mouth like making lightning. And then she goes from that to an almost lover kind of image. Oh, it's just, and she brings it back to herself on page 85. In the beginning, the letter N was the image of a snake. When I write my name, I hold the cool, scaled body of the snake. Set it writhing on the page. In it sings. And it's just, it goes on and on. To write is to be eaten, to read, to be full. Oh, the rattlesnake moves like sepia ink. I loved it. And there's one point in it where at the very end, her tia, her aunt, has skinned a rattlesnake in the backyard and fried it, and not her aunt, her uncle, and he gave her the rattle tied on a cord, she had it around her neck, and her Mojave great grandmother saw it and said, take it off. And I asked why. She said, would you wear my foot around your neck? I said, you don't have feet. She said, take it off. She said, we don't eat snakes. They are our sisters. She said, I gave you my name. I called you. And I watched her tongue like a whip of ink write my name in the air. And I just, I love a lot of them. The first water is the body is beautiful, but the skin light may be one that's my favorite. And it's partially because I sort of think she's doing a lot of the same themes that she picks up other places, and that it isn't ours. So but that's the way she writes.
Yeah.
I'll quit. But I love that poem.
Jeff?
yeah, I was just going to add onto that when I read that poem, Alice, I teach American literature, so I'm suddenly thinking of all these snake poems, right? The ones that have risen to the top, so to speak, Dickinson and D.H. Lawrence and all of that. But, this one is superior, I think. Maybe it might be like no one has ever written this snake poem. And I really had that thought when I was reading it, and it got to the part, I think you mentioned on page 85, when I write my name, I hold the cool scaled body of the snake, set it writhing on the page. I was like, oh, okay, I just loved this particular poem, thinking of it within the context of other snake poems. And then later, that's when I had the thought, well, it's probably better than all of them, which is really, really fascinating, because we have this, well, who would ever think you could write a snake poem and like take it to another level? But I think she does in this poem. So.
Yeah. Amy, what do you have?
I just wanted to, I need to jump off, but I want, oh, am I unmuted? Yeah. I just wanted to first thank you, Sandy. I'm, to paraphrase Paul Simon, I don't know much about poetry, but but that doesn't stop me from ever expressing an opinion. And I just, when I read this, it's not something I would have read on my own had it not been selected. So thank you. I had trouble with it at first, and then I kept coming back to it. And I had trouble with it just because I have trouble with concentration these days. And I kept coming back to it. And I found it just so luscious. I loved how she deconstructed sex to metaphor and body parts in a way that destigmatized it and de-tabooized it. Mm-hmm. And I also just wanted to add, because I do need to go, and I'm so sorry, but I'll be back for the next one. I'm reading Robin Kemper's Braiding Sweetgrass right now, and it's a wonderful bookend for this book. It's like the perfect bookend. So if anyone's interested in checking that out, I highly recommend it if you like this book. And just thank you so much, Sandy. This is really
Hey, Amy, will you put that book in the chat?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you. Kathleen.
I just, getting back just to snake, like just for a bit, it just made me think of when Wallace Stevens wrote 13 Ways of Looking at a Blackbird. And that was so original and so different to be a poet and to take one, animal and just keep dealing with it and writing about it and describing it in fresh ways. And so anyway, that I just thought of him as kind of the origin of that sort of approach of dealing with various aspects and dividing up a poem like that.
Yeah. Okay. Let's think about the ways that she is using craft that maybe surprised you. Was there a structure of a poem that was interesting or that you hadn't seen before, or anything like that that was interesting to you? Kathleen?
Well, what I really like is, because I'm starting to do this in my own work, but I liked how she had traditional poems on some level, but that she had prose poetry. Or when you look on, I think it's page 34 and 35 and 34 Inklight, it's a prose poem. It's, no line breaks, but it's very poetic. Whereas the Mustangs, I mean, that's an essay. That's a lyric essay. I like that she's using different forms and blending the boundaries of the different genres. Because I'm starting to do that myself. I think I've felt like it was a kindred spirit playing around that way.
Yeah. KB.
Yeah, and of course now I can't find it since, but there are several places in here where she uses language, I guess grammatically incorrectly, and I love that her ability to do that and get me to see something that I wouldn't have seen. I would have just rushed over it if it had been written like we normally write it. The one that I just was able to turn to really quickly was on page 86, where she says, the rattlesnake, period, I, period, R, ampersand, period. And there are several instances, and that was just the first one I could come to, but that makes me stop and think instead of just rushing through an ordinary sentence, even in poetry. It makes me stop and consider what the ampersand is, and why this is separated like this. And I just appreciate that, how she does that in several places in her poems.
Yeah. Yeah. I think she uses punctuation really interestingly. She uses a lot of em dashes. And then she did something in grief work that I don't think I've seen before, but maybe you guys have. It's a em dash followed by a colon, which I was like, wow, that's a big pause there. But interesting, right? But I don't think I've ever seen that like that before. And there's many places in here that she uses spacing and punctuation in ways that I wouldn't be brave enough to try. Leslie, what do you have?
So for me, the poem that I've been trying to spend more time with is the exhibits from the American Water Museum. And that's because I too, in my mind, have a water museum and write poetry obsessively about water and what's happening to water. And I'm not familiar, like in her note, she references a different text called The Water Museum, Luis Alberto Urrea's The Water Museum, and says that book sort of inspired her. But I'm curious about this poem and would love to know more about it. And I love the way it's arranged. I'm surprised, by the numbering system. Like, what the hell is that? I guess this is how I go through a museum, kind of randomly, looking at things, and so these are the numbered exhibits, but what they are exhibits of are amazing. And like 204, a dilapidated diorama of the mythical city of Flint, Michigan, right? Like, holy hell, right? Or 123, marginalia from the BIA watermongers congressional records redacted, right? I mean, for me, this was the poem that sold me on the book. I was like, okay.
Yeah, I agree. I really love that.
And I think it's a very unique aesthetic, and one that I've tried in some variations, but not like this, not masterfully and as fully as realized as this one here. So I love it.
Mary.
Yeah, I was thinking about two of the poems that were just mentioned, and in particular, one was the same line, that the rattlesnake, I, R, ampersand. That to me was like a bell ringing, just saying, you can be so much braver in your writing. You can be so much more inventive and dare to do things that are not sentences, and that just really play with the structure of it all, and not just the words, but the arrangement, the punctuation. So that really made me want to sit down with a pen and write. And I also felt some of the same things about the American Water Museum. And to me, it's such a graceful protest poem, because she has, she plays around with the poetic structure like she does in other places in the book, so that each entry is a little bit different. And some are funny in a dark way, and some are just right to your heart. And it's never preachy. It just offers itself up to you and asks you to feel and just be present for a moment to what she's giving you, kind of one bite at a time. And I just think in terms of getting a point across, that's just an amazing example. I mean, I feel like she teaches you, she persuades you, she questions your commitment, she does all kinds of things in that list of mythical exhibits, and I love it, and I wish I could do that too.
Catherine. Wait, I can't hear you.
We can hear you.
No, I can't hear Catherine. Did you hit your space bar by any chance? Because sometimes that.
She put in the chat that she was going to go out and come back in. Maybe that'll work.
Okay. Okay. So let's go to Annette. Your hand was raised.
Yeah, I liked the poem about the American Water Museum too, and I was intrigued by the numbering and just thought I wasn't sure if she was going through the museum in her own way and these were the numbers of the exhibits, or whether she was just juxtaposing pieces against each other that she thought would be interesting. But I kind of wanted to go back to grief work. So I always find when I write poetry that, I use precisely the right punctuation because, I've been teaching English for so long. And I have to make myself play, remind myself that I don't have to be precise. But I wanted to know what you all made of the M dash and the colon, like just how it affected your reading of the poem and how you interpreted that, because I really wasn't sure. I mean, I didn't feel like a colon was always introducing something, and I didn't know if it was just supposed to be a long pause or what, and I just wondered what other people made of that.
Yeah, I was confused. I didn't really know what that meant. Like, I was like, I've never seen this before. So I don't have an answer.
I mean, me too, but I thought maybe other people would have insights that I lacked.
Catherine, you have something?
I thought that stacked up punctuation was excessive. I didn't think it was really necessary. Those things always strike me as a little gimmicky. But I have another poem which strikes me as very formally crafty.
Yeah.
And that is The Cure for Melancholy is to Take the Horn.
Mm.
It's not a sestina, it's not a hazal, but it's doing some of the same stuff. What she does with the repetition of horn and the unicorn horn and the bull's horn. And my favorite moment was probably when she made it thorn, which was totally a sestina kind of move.
Yeah, she does use a lot of repetition in a lot of these poems, which kind of sets up this nice rhythm when you read it aloud, especially. KB.
I was just going to say about the punctuation. The only places I've seen this used before are from people who are in California, in the California type area. It's really interesting. When I was at Squaw Valley, a lot of the writers were writing like this with the colon and the M dashes and lots of breaking on the page. But I couldn't ever get them to tell me whether it was because of the way they wanted to show it on the page or because of the way they wanted to perform it when they read it. And listening to Natalie Diaz read some of these, when she was reading in her first book, she read it, even if it was memorized, it was more like how I would read it as it is on the page. And I noticed that in her later work, and I didn't see a lot of her reading, so it might have just been the pieces I picked, but it seemed like the closer in time to where we are now, she's got that kind of performance groove going on of how she's reading it. And I wonder if that's not for her to know how she wants to perform it, perhaps.
So did she pause in a, like, I don't know, more bigger pause when she read that? Did she read one of the poems that had that, KB? Those punctuations?
I don't know that I paid attention particularly to that thing. I just noticed that in her later work, it seemed like she read differently than she did in her earlier work.
Right. Interesting. Anybody else have something? Jeff, you have something? You're muted.
Go for it, Linda.
Okay. I don't know how to get rid of the hand now.
It'll fade away.
Oh, will it? Okay. I guess still back on the punctuation. If you look at the words, all of the words except the word times have to do with her and the body. And I consider horns, you know, part of the body. I think it's a sexual sort of reference to me. You've got her, horns, hers, mouth, and times, which is sort of the outlier. Body, and then hands. I don't know if that has anything to do with anything, but those are all pretty much of the body. So who knows? It's a mysterious thing, her creation, maybe. I don't know.
I'm just curious, following also up on what KB was saying about seeing other poets maybe doing this when you were at Squaw Valley. I mean, I'm wondering if it's some kind of idiosyncratic thing that one poet started doing and other people started mimicking. Like, you know, like we dig the M dash now because of Emily Dickinson, right? And so we all, you know, like the M dash is okay. So let me like one up the M dash and add a colon, and like, what is that about, right? I mean, how much of it is trend and how much of it is a genuine aesthetic move, a genuinely original aesthetic move, right? Yeah. I mean, I like it. It doesn't like, I like the fact that it makes me really slow down in reading that poem. But it would be interesting to know maybe why, you know. I like the way she's using it. I don't know how I would like it in other poems. I like it in this poem.
Right. I think you have a point, Leslie, because when I'm reading submissions to Rockvale Review, the trend that
I bet you
more of is prose poems in the prose poem format, but with these double slashes.
Yeah.
Between phrases. And the first time I saw that, I thought, oh, that's pretty cool. But now I'm seeing it a lot. I'm like, it's not so cool anymore.
And I'm like, somebody's taking the same workshops with the same teachers at the same schools or something. Yeah. You know, and I'm just like, where do we draw the line on those kind of things? But I like it here, so.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Catherine, did you have something else? No? Okay.
Sandy, let me just add to that you know, you think about a poet like Archie Ammons, A.R. Ammons, you know, is noted for using a colon practically after every sentence throughout books. And I think it's Alice Notley that has maybe done two colons. And then you'll have someone like Dara Wire. I just kind of looked down here at my bookcase. If you've got this book, Reverse Rapture, every poem in this book uses parentheses after every sentence, every thought. And they're all in parentheses through the entire book. So I'm a little bit like Catherine. at times where I wonder if certain aspects of that punctuation or a little gimmicky or a way to do something that seems very distinctive. And I guess I came from a generation where, like, if you're doing that to kind of be distinctive, it's really a cover up. So for the non-exceptionality of your poems. But of course, I don't think that in terms of these poems or with what she's done. But anyway, that's one thought I'm having as we're having this discussion. I do think it's an interesting question. What was it, Leslie? You asked whether it was done out of some genuine. I forget how you worded that, but I thought it was really like perfect.
Yeah. Yep. Katie.
I was just going to say to that that she uses it in specific ways, not in everything. And the people who I see use it everywhere, it makes me wonder, like other people are saying, if instead of working on the language, they're working on something that's unusual to make them different, instead of making the line and the language better for the poems. People who do it a lot, I guess, is what I noticed. That I don't care for their poetry, I suppose, but like Leslie was saying, she uses it not all the time, and so when she does use it, it makes me stop and say, why is it there? What is it doing? As opposed to, oh no, there it is again.
Yeah. Anybody else have anything about craft or anything surprising about the poems?
Well, you know, I did create a writing prompt for, you know, the sort of lengthier sectioned type of poem, and that came out of seeing those examples within her book, including you know, the ones that we've already mentioned about the water exhibit and the one about the river and the body, but also just the like top 10 reasons why you know, Indians are good at basketball, those types of things. You know, for craft, to me, they were almost like anchor stores in the mall of the book. They're positioned at different places, so I think that's kind of fascinating in terms of structure for the book. But while I'm thinking of it too, I know when Leslie mentioned some things, but you know, one of the books that she does reference in her notes is "A River Dies of Thirst," Mahmoud Darwish. I don't know if you're familiar with this whole book. This is Archipelago Books, and I suspect that some of the prose poems or the parts of her poems which are little brief, not stanzas, but you know, brief paragraphs, a sentence or two, that may come from the influence of Darwish or that particular book, because he does that, and he has lots of prose poems within this book also. But you know, like little sentences that go for a line or two, and then a white space, and then another one. And she's got poems that resemble that. So it was one of the first thoughts I had as I was reading through and encountered. And I was so happy to see that she had mentioned his book in her notes. I was like, oh, okay, maybe that's where she's getting it from.
Katie?
I don't generally read long poems. Just I look at them and I see them so densely packed on a page. Sometimes I just go, I don't have time for that. And I wasn't planning on reading her long poems when I saw some of them, just because that's, you know, my default is not to read something that looks like a lot on the page at one time. But her language, I don't remember who said it now, but I complimented them when they said it, is luscious. And I had to read. I read every poem in this book, and it was just, I mean, the language, you can't, some of it sounds so ordinary, but how she puts it together is just amazing. The resting is in me. Oh my gosh, I have so much stuff underlined that I just want to explore, you know, in my chest. I am two-hearted always, love and what love becomes. I know what it's like to be appetite of our own appetite. There's no such thing as time or June, only what you're born into. What? I mean, you pick something so abstract as time and then give a specific month. And you throw them together like that, and it's like, wow, oh my gosh, she's writing on another level, and it just drew me into the craft of her writing. Is so good that even something I wouldn't have normally done pulled me right into reading more of her. So if you didn't get to read all the long poems, do. They're really good.
Roseanne.
Yeah, this one that I wanted to talk about was not one of her longer poems, but it was the poem on 58, page 58, entitled "It Was the Animals." Now, she talks again about her brother in such a way that, for me, I mean, it's so touching, it's so gut-wrenching, and it's so accurate for anyone who has loved someone who is disturbed in some way. Her brother's addiction to meth is perhaps what is catapulting him to believe that a bit of a picture frame is a piece of the ark. But she kind of wraps her arms around this and understands what he's talking about, and says that she could take it. You know, she could take the ark. It's like she played with that and then made it something really beautiful. If you've ever been with someone who is hallucinating or seeing, you know, or making up a story or presenting a story that it can't possibly be true, our reaction is not to enjoy the images that come forward. She says later in the poem that she could take the ark, but it was the animals I could not take, and then conjures up this entire strange scene that these animals had cracked the door frame with their hooves and hips, marched past me into my kitchen, into my brother, tails snaking, and there's that word, snake, but it's used as a verb here, tails snaking across my feet before disappearing, like retracting vacuum cords into the hollows of my brother's clavicles, tusks scraping the walls. It's so vivid. It's just enthralling. I feel that she is an empath, that she feels deeply the sadness, the confusion, the tragedy of what she sees happening. And I just was so gripped by that and thinking, yes, there's beauty even in this terrible trauma, the wounds that she is seeing.
Yeah.
Yeah, like that line, a few stanzas down on the first page. His fingers were silkened by pipe blisters.
Yes.
That one I had underlined, like, that to me is amazing. You take something that's hideous and you make it musical and lovely.
Right.
I so agree, Leslie.
Kathleen.
I was just going to say, I agree with KB about not being attracted to long poems. I, kind of turn the page, but I think what she does so well is she gives you space. She spaces them out. She gives you breathing room. She gives you a little air. And so you're more inclined to wander in than you might.
Yeah, which speaks to the intentionality of how she ordered these poems. I think she did a really good job on that. Anybody else? Okay.
Well, nobody's mentioned her sense of humor.
She has it, doesn't she?
She does. She's got it in spades. Don't you love her creation story? Oh, this is the ultimate basketball poem. That 10 reasons, top 10 reasons. But there's that really good creation story that I've got to find and read just so everybody will appreciate it. Oh, where is it, Jeff? I'm looking. Oh yeah, page 40. Go for the second strophe on page 40. Because a long time ago, the creator gave us a choice. You could write like an Indian god, or you could have a jump shot sweeter than a 44-ounce can of government grape juice, one or the other. Everyone but Sherman Alexie chose the jump shot. Isn't that great? I thought that was fantastic. It's a great compliment to Sherman Alexie, too.
I love an American arithmetic. So clever. It's not funny, but it's clever. Race is a funny word. Race implies someone will win. Interesting.
Yeah. So have you found something in this book that you think you can jump off from into your own writing?
I'm going to write longer poems.
I'm going to try to use grammar not correctly. That's hard as an English teacher, I know.
Into the impulse to that sentences don't really have to always make logical linear sense. I like to play with that, and then I always have misgivings about it. She does it really well, though. She's way better than I am, but I'm going to try more of that.
Roseanne? You're muted.
Sorry. I think I have to bleed on the page more. I think she's so raw and just opens it all up. And that really is very moving. As a reader is very moved by that. And I was just thinking about what one instructor had said about when I got really too flowery on things and there's this loftiness. Oh, he said, I hear the symphony. And I don't want that anymore. I want it to be more like, oh, I hear that raccoon running around in the dumpster. But it's just more of a gut level, and I want to be able to do that.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes. Tanya.
Makes sense to me. I need to do the same thing. But she does it so beautifully, and I have a little trouble doing it as prettily as she does.
Linda, your audio is a little bit blurry for me.
I'm glad to know it wasn't me.
I'm not sure I heard all that. Tanya, did you have something?
Yeah, I also really loved that poem, If It Should Come Upon Your House, Lonely in the West Texas Desert, which was just this haunting that was so beautiful, and like the poems where she's following her brother into these imaginary landscapes, just the permission to go the distance, like let yourself fall in love with what you're writing, and you might end up in a totally different room, but you can bring us there. So I'm gonna try.
Yeah. KB?
Tanya, did you read in the notes that she wrote that after reading Three Little Bears?
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, I went, oh my gosh, and then I had to go back and read it and went, there it is. But
yeah,
I mean, okay, so we could write off from children's stories now too.
Linda Parsons?
Yeah, just in the way that she shows the poems on the page. I'm trying to free myself up a little bit more in form and have more spacing and I mean, even in just, it was animals. I think we all probably use quotes sometimes in our poems, what people are saying. And she indents the quoted material and also italics, which we use, but it's like, that's such a simple thing, but it's like every poem has a different form almost.
Yeah.
And I just think that's great to just look at how she's working on the page, It's freeing, I think.
Mm.
Sandy, one thing that hasn't been mentioned is and I don't know what to make of it, but the quotes that she has as section dividers.
Mm-hmm.
And there was the one I loved was Robin Fenty. Didn't they tell you that I was a savage? And that one comes a little bit later, but she has one from Darwish and some others. But I'd be curious, just from a purely intellectual standpoint. I mean, if I see those as kinds of epigraphs to the sections, then in what way do they work, and how do they unify together that series of poems that follow before the next one, the next section begins? I don't have any kind of answers for those, but it was something I thought of as I was reading through.
Yeah, that would require really looking at each poem, following that epigraph and kind of seeing how which I have not done, but interesting. And of course, savage is what, is a slang for the Native Americans. And she used savaging in a couple of these poems as verbs too, which I thought was really interesting. Anybody got something else? I'm going to write a museum poem. I don't know what my museum is going to be, but I'm going to do something with that. I just thought that was really interesting.
Yeah. I would never have encountered this book likely, if it hadn't been for all of you here, because it wouldn't show up in a bookstore here, I think. And it's very new to me and very, very, it's just opened up a whole lot of ways of looking at things and saying things. And one of the things that really came home to me, I'm Irish, and is that we've lost our language. We're a colonized nation too. We're post-colonial. I was finding a lot of echoes, very different and yet familiar. So it's been a great eye-opener to read it.
That's so interesting, Melda. Thank you for saying that.
Thank you.
Yeah, Tanya.
I think you mentioned this in the beginning, Sandy, about the notes section. I know sometimes as a poet, I think, I got to keep the secret world and let the reader discover it. But I loved her end notes, and she was so generous there to explain the connections. And so I'm just thinking about that too.
Right. I've become kind of enamored with end notes in a poetry book. I just really appreciate that so much. I think it adds to, the understanding and the reading of the book. I don't know. I don't want there to be secrets. I don't want to know everything. Okay, so we're getting kind of towards the end of our time. I was looking at your chat comments a little bit, and it looks like everybody liked a different poem as their favorite poem, except I guess a few people liked The First Water is the Body. My thought was if we all kind of agreed on a favorite poem, which I knew was not going to happen, but if there was a lot of people that liked the same poem, that we might read that poem. But this poem is 7 pages
Long,
long.
long, yeah.
So maybe we won't read that poem, but maybe that's a poem we can revisit. Or
What if we did this, Sandy? I mean, you know, I think we all have a favorite line, perhaps, from the book, and
Oh, that's hard too. I was going to
well,
say
it is.
maybe read the title poem
Yeah.
even, but I like the line.
Well, on page 86, I love I put it in the chat, but it says, walking over a word with the teeth of our mind. And I just thought that was such a fantastic line. But I think it also becomes an entryway into thinking about what she's doing, right? I mean, she's digesting America. She's thinking through, and teeth is so interesting because it's savage. And I don't know. It's just the richness of that line to me just would keep multiplying if I traced it through the book. And that's something I would, you know, it's maybe something to kind of consider within the whole context of a book club like this, right? Where even as we go forward, there are, you know, in an ideal sense, you'd read the entirety of a book through one line. Except every time you read the book, you'd read it through the entirety or the lens of a different line. So that at some point you would read the entire text through every single word, through the lens of every word. And the magnitude of what a book might be would, you know, hopefully be more revealed. And I forget if or I don't know if anybody saw my note, but you know, this book was long listed since we picked it, right? I mean, it was long listed for the National Book Award. So, you know, it's getting some buzz, I guess.
well, does anybody have a favorite line that they want to throw out? Tell us what poem it's in and then just say it if you have one.
I just posted mine, but it's from The First Water is the Body. And it's a refrain that comes up. We carry the river, its body of water in our body.
Yeah.
I also posted mine from American Arithmetic. I am doing my best to not become a museum of myself.
Yes. Now I'm seeing them all in the chat.
You know, KB, I think you put in there what we hold grows weight, becomes enough or burden. I think does she say in the notes that part of that at least is either an echo or she got it from Creeley, Robert Creeley?
Mm-hmm.
I was just going to say I put mine in the chat, and that's what it was. And it comes from isn't the air also a body moving? And I don't remember about the notes, but it's, I mean, just I keep thinking about that line.
Mm-hmm.
And even her acknowledgments. If you read, I read the acknowledgments. I never read acknowledgments, but even the acknowledgments were beautifully crafted. Yes, it is the Robert Creeley. Yeah.
Yeah.
Apparently, he had a correspondence with Ayla Limon.
Yeah.
And that's just, I'm like, oh my gosh, what?
See, that's another thing we should try. Have a correspondence with another poet and write poems in response to that back and forth, which would be really interesting.
Yeah, I've done that.
Well,
you know, it's a lot of fun. Huh?
It figures you've done that.
Well, I wrote poems directly to people, and then they wrote poems back, and I've done that for Linda. I've written a poem to Linda. Sorry, Linda, it's never been accepted anywhere. I can't get it published. But the one I wrote to Al McGinnis, his response poem was published next to mine in the Southern Review many years ago. But it's kind of fun.
right. Anybody have any final comments that you want to say about this book?
Thanks for picking it. It was a good one.
Yeah.
Good. I'm glad. I'm glad you liked it.
I
Okay.
surely love the thought of us purchasing this book. I think that it's important to show that we are investing in poets, and certainly one of this background. So I was proud to be able to do that. It's going to be a favorite of mine.
Good.
Yeah.
I'm
I
glad.
feel I'm just starting with it, you know.
Yes.
Beginning.
Great, great. I'm glad you guys enjoyed it. Well, just a little bit of looking ahead. Well, first of all, there are prompts. Jeff has written prompts that are on the Facebook group page, inspired by this book, Postcolonial Love Poem. So check those out. Also on the Facebook page, if you would like to write a couple sentences of a review or comments or thoughts about this book, add your comments to that post. And then my plan is to create something on the Rockvale Review website where all that will be collected under a book club tab, which has yet to be created, but hopefully it will be at some point in my spare time, right? But put some thoughts there, brief thoughts, comments, whatever you want to say about this book, so that we can remember. And then next book club meeting is October 20th at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time. And Jeff had the book Maps of Injury by Chira. Is that how you say her name? Chira Hammonds? Chira Hammond? Shara Hammond's Sundress Publications.
It's a completely different book, but you know, more of a Texas landscape. But anyway, when Sandy and I were first talking about this, we were looking at, just recently published books, and then maybe a mixture of national, well-known or more well-known poets like Natalie Diaz or David Kirby, who'll be later, and then also, more local or, flying under the radar, or poets whose books are published by smaller presses like Sundress Publications, right? Or JCAR Press, and Catherine and I have been connected with that press. But just to, kind of moving in and out and exposing all of us. I mean, not all of you probably have 5,000 collections of poetry like I have. I'm sitting in my office over my garage, and I have way too many books. But most of us, might not encounter some of the poets that we're going to throw out, and it's just, we'll like some of them better than others, and we'll resonate or we won't. But I think we can learn, especially for those of us who are writing, and we can learn something from every book that we read, and so I come at it with that spirit, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, and the cool thing is, Jeff, is you get small press and local both with Sundress because they're based in Knoxville. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah. Yeah. So we'll be alternating kind of more national and then coming back to more local, back and forth like that. This is the plan.
And many of us know, like we know Lisa up in Nashville with her book, and I know Shara personally as well. But as we go forward, it's likely, you'll be introduced to people that you know really well, and then maybe some others that are like, I've never heard of this poet, but that's part of it. So
yeah. All righty. Well, thank you all for coming and for reading and for sharing. Appreciate it.
Thank y'all.
Thank you.
Great
Thank y'all.
rest of the week.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Nice to see you all.
Nice to see you too.